I have noticed a few patterns showing up recently, and I paid attention to it. And when I noticed what kept coming up around me, it was time for me to pay attention. And as I spiritually listened to what would reveal itself, I heard this phrase: an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was time for me to go and study and share on what I saw in scripture and hear in my spirit. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5, and we find this verse, that phrase actually in verse 38. It says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Verse 39 says, "But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek," remember this one, "turn to him the other also." Jesus is here giving his major speech to the people. He is speaking of personality, character, mindset. And then we get to verse 38. What I saw were individuals struggling with conflict with others. And let me tell you, I have had conversations with individuals. My heart ached for them because of the way that they were carrying conflict, it was affecting their hearts and minds, their health, and they were basically living with it. When I saw the patterns, I knew that it was time, and I heard the phrase, I knew it was time for me to go into scripture. So look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, and then we'll talk about 39. One of the things you find, and I love scripture, is that whenever you read the word, whenever you see things repeating, or whenever you see patterns, pay attention to them, because it's like a spiritual hand telling you to go follow the sign, right? Well, look at this. In the scripture, if you look at verse 38, you see a phrase. It says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said." You know what? That's said again. If you go before that in verse 33, you see, "Again, you have heard." And let's see if we see it anywhere else. Yes, verse 27 in chapter 5. You read, "Ye have heard that." And then we see the pattern again in verse 21. "Ye have heard that." What the scripture is showing us is that the word that is spoken here was actually spoken before in another time, and it was. So here the word is telling us, go back to where I spoke this first, and it was spoken in Exodus chapter 21. Let's go to Exodus chapter 21. What's interesting here is when we go back to chapter 21, we actually have traveled from Jesus speaking on the mount. When we hear this, we're traveling back around 15 to 1400 years that this word was spoken. That excited me. Exodus chapter 21, 1400 years before. We are in chapter 21 of Exodus, where the children of Israel have come out of bondage, they've come out of Egypt, and laws are being given dealing with civil behavior. These are civil laws, how to act with each other when there is conflict. All right, when we go to chapter 21, verse 24, we find the exact same verbiage. 24, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and a little bit extra. Hand for hand, foot for foot. Let me pause here. The word that was in divine flesh was basically telling us in Matthew chapter 5, listen, I'm going to repeat myself. Therefore, whatever I said before, it still stands here and all of the context around it, right? So let's look at the context of that statement here in chapter 21. Again, this is civil law being given to people who only knew how to be slaves. And they're being taught when there's issues with each other, this is how you deal with issues, serious issues. But I'm going to pause, because in order to understand this law, you have to go back a little bit further. And let's go back to chapter 18. Paramount here to understand this. In chapter 18, the children of Israel again are in the wilderness. They're just coming out, And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, meets them. And he's like, I'm paraphrasing, hey, son, what in the world? Jethro watches Moses and notices how Moses is meeting with each and every person when it comes to issues and dealings. And Jethro says to Moses in chapter 18 of Exodus, verse 17, and Moses' father in law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Verse 18, thou wilt surely wear away both you and this people, right? Jethro says, Moses, the way you are governing and bringing forth judgment and helping these individuals, son, is going to wear you out. And not only is it going to wear you out, but um, he also says in the scripture, and it's going to wear the people out, right? Read the scripture so you can see that, right? So Jethro offers counsel to Moses and says, listen, I want you, the best way to handle this is get some people, put them in place, let them take care of the small issues, the major issues you deal with, right? So, corporate HR, spiritual HR is set up, right? So, Jethro helps Moses in setting up a structure in dealing with conflict, number one, right? And Jethro tells him in verse 23, if thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure. Here it is right here. I want you to pay attention to. And all this people shall also go to their place in peace. Then we go to chapter 21 and understand that the process of executing judgment is in place, and the purpose of the judgment, people, the judges, and the judgment, that it is the execution of it, the purpose and end result is for peace. So now we see it in execution mode, and we get to chapter 21 of Exodus, verse 22, and we start getting examples of how judgment is to be executed for what purpose? So that man can have peace, right? Verse 22, if men strive and hurt a woman with child, meaning there's a fight going on and there's a woman standing by and she gets hurt, so that her fruit depart from her, the child she's bearing dies, and yet no mischief follow, and there's nothing messy going on, he shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Let's pause. Remember, judgment in the process of judgment executed has been put in place so that there will be peace. We have a scenario here. If someone is accidentally hurt, then the husband or the person of that wife or that person has every right to say what he wants in place of his loss. Justice is deserved. And if there's messiness going on, then that man has to lose his life, right? Let's go, keep going. And then verse 24, we see why. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. Verse 25, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe, right? We understand that there should be righteous judges to execute divine judgment. So once the conflict is solved, everyone has peace. We are supposed to have judgment, justice. We're supposed to have justice. Judgment has to come, but the end result of judgment is so that everyone can have peace. But let's keep going. Verse 26, and if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perishes, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. You mean to tell me that he doesn't grab his eye? He should get his lick back. The divine justice is, what's more valuable to a slave? Freedom. You took my eye, I close my eye. I get to leave. That is divine justice, right? Let's go to 27. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. I should get my lick back. What's more valuable? What actually is righteous judgment for the slave that has lost his tooth? Freedom. We see the context of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's not, I get my lick back. It's the right kind of justice has to happen, or the right type of judgment. You did this to me, then this is only the righteous type of judgment that has to be cast in order for me to walk away with peace. Now, let's go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. In Matthew 5:38, we find the word speaking, repeating itself. And if it's repeating itself, it is repeating itself with the same context that it was stated and given in the beginning. Righteous judgment through righteous judges, so that the end result of conflict resolution is everyone has peace. Matthew 5, verse 38 and 39, the Word that was flesh, Jesus Christ, Yeshua, is informing the individuals, not only I said what I said, and you're supposed to have justice and you're supposed to have peace, but it is also speaking of how it should happen. In the Old Testament, there were judges. Now we have judges today, and we have HR, and we have leaders. And the one thing that we're supposed to have is righteous judgment. Okay? But we don't have that a lot today. There are some individuals, unfortunately, that are not operating in righteousness. So let me talk out this scripture to you. Yes, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And the judgment that is cast so that individuals can have peace has to be a type of divine justice, a divine judgment, so that when the person who is afflicted walks away, they have peace within. It is not, they take my eye, I take theirs back. But it is life for a life when there is mischievousness or malbehavior. But let's go to 38. Yeshua, 14, 15 years later, Jesus Christ, gives us something more. But I say unto you, verse 39, that ye resist not evil. Pause. I'm talking now about poor behavior, evil behavior. Let's bring that into our day, our time. People that do not mean you any good, they meant you harm. I want you to resist it. And then he says, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. There are individuals that interpret this scripture that if they hit you on your cheek, you're supposed to just take it and turn the other cheek. That is incorrect scripturally. Because the word said in Exodus, and he is repeating himself because he's saying it again and he's saying it, I'm saying what I said, that you are supposed to receive justice. And in that justice, you should have peace. So it doesn't make sense that the scripture here is saying, take it on one side and go ahead and take it on the other. What the word, the divine word is saying, I do not want you to mimic the behavior. I do not want you to handle conflict resolution the same way that the oppressor did. I want you to resist the evilness in that person, and I want you to respond by turning away from it. Because if I face you and I experience trauma or pain from you, I'm going to turn my head in another direction. And what is the direction we are turning in? For righteous judgment. Now listen, I know that we have people that are supposed to be our leaders and judges, and they're not right. But guess what? You are supposed to have divine judgment, and you're supposed to have peace. When you are unable to receive divine justice and you don't have peace, after you go to the judge, after you go to the teacher, after you go to HR, after you go to the courts, and you do not have peace, you are to go to the one true judge, the righteous judge, and let him know, I don't have peace. I am in offense. That is one of the most challenging things for believers, to not retaliate, to resist evil and look for divine justice. And not give back that lick that they gave you. But let me tell you something, and I speak on this from experience. Woe unto them that receives judgment from the I am that I am on behalf of his people. Woe unto the soul that has to receive justice from the hand of Jehovah, who reaches into the atmosphere and takes care of business. When you understand judgment according to scripture, going back to the Old Testament, you understand from the teachings that judgment comes to restore balance, restore life, and peace in man. That is the purpose of judgment. If someone is casting judgment and it's causing lives to be lost, minds and hearts to be in pain, woe unto them. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The word says divine justice executed in a divine way. And the only way it can come is if we resist evil and turn towards divine justice. Please walk from this moment on knowing that you're not supposed to take it. You're supposed to seek justice in a divine way so that you can have life, restoration,